समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Spain beat France in the semi-final at FIFA World Cup. And you know what? For a long time, we've been thinking about featuring Spain in Cut the Clutter because it's such a fascinating country. And it's not just because my newsroom is filled with Rafa fans. My friends have named their dogs Rafa. It's not just about Nadal. The Spanish sporting power is something else. This is a very unique culture of sporting soft power that Spain has built. That's only one side. But it needed some reason for us to talk about Spain, which is also a fascinating country in multiple other ways. Spanish culture, Spanish language, it's one of the most spoken languages in the world. The Spanish have had a huge empire. All those former colonies speak Spanish, maybe with the exception of Portugal, if you can call it a former colony. But they've also picked up many of the cultural traits. The love for football, for example. That's why you find football so popular in Latin America. Spain also is interesting for its politics that we will come into. Its politics internally and also historically. In Islamic history, the conquest of Spain, or what used to be the Iberian Peninsula, or what in Islamic history was described as Andalus, Al-Andalus or Andalusia, that is considered to be the golden period, the peak, the very acme of Islamic power and Islamic history, beginning with early 8th century, beginning with 711 AD. That's when the Umayyad Caliphate established itself in Spain or Iberian Peninsula, ruling almost all of the modern Spain. They were finally defeated. The last element of them were finally defeated in 1492 AD. So almost for 800 years they ruled Spain. That was the territory of Granada that was defeated last, or that was conquered by the Spanish rulers, by the modern Christian or Catholic Spanish rulers. It was also under their watch that from 1478 the brutal Spanish Inquisition was carried out. The Spanish Inquisition, which began in November 1478, continued on for almost 350 years, in fact exactly 356 years, in bits and parts, as the country and society almost completely Catholicized itself. It ended in 1834. It's a coincidence, we didn't plan it. On 15th of July, that is the evening when we are recording this episode of Cut the Clutter. That's when followers of all religions were forced to convert to Catholicism, and then there were inquisitions in terms of figuring out who was secretly practicing some other religion, and then people were burnt at the stake. Numbers vary, but thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people were burned at the stake. Not a pleasant way to die. In the process, the Islamic power completely was wiped out of Spain. And a kind of modern Spain emerged, which then had its colonial moment, going out to Latin America and Africa. This was also the era of silver, when silver was discovered and silver became the currency of the world, and that really enriched Spain. That was then the high point of Spanish colonial history and power. And then Spain had other troubles, particularly coming into the 20th century. Those we'll come to in just a little bit. Meanwhile, internally in Spain, a more modern problem came up. And I don't know where to start, but let me start with now. If you see the Spanish team now, of the 11 who went out to play, in the starting 11, 4 were from a region called Catalonia. Now, Catalonia is a region, please see it on the map. That's where the city of Barcelona is situated, and that's where Barcelona, the club, is also located. So the big rivalry in Spanish football internally is Real Madrid, which is kind of central Spanish territory, and or you might say the heartland or the Spanish heartland, and Barcelona, the two clubs. These two clubs also produce the greatest of talent in Spain, and also they attract the greatest of talent from other countries. Messi, for example, had been playing for Barcelona. Now, Catalonians have seen themselves as a separate country. They've seen themselves as a separate country. There have been many rebellions. They've tried to force, multiple times, tried to force a referendum. At one point in 2017, they even held a referendum which the government, Madrid or the central government, let me say, they ruled to be illegal. And yet these separatist forces in Catalonia, or maybe independence-seeking or autonomy-seeking forces in Catalonia, they forced a referendum even though the central government sent its forces to suppress it. Referendum was very incomplete. 43% people voted, 90% voted for separation. Then the central government and the courts ruled it out. They also ruled in 2010, the Spanish Supreme Court also ruled that the use of the term nation by Catalonians for themselves was illegal and unconstitutional. So Spain has had this internal mess also. Catalonia has a lot of autonomy, but all key things from currency to armed forces to the power to declare war on somebody, foreign policy, all of that is controlled by the central authority. That is not very different. I know that I'm stretching it, but that's not very different from what the spirit of Article 370 was meant to be, never intended to be, meant to be when it was promised to Sheikh Abdullah. That is when Jammu and Kashmir, the ruler of Jammu and Kashmir, signed the instrument of accession, and Sheikh Abdullah supported him. And Article 370 came in. The basic idea was that currency, foreign affairs, defense, communication, etc., those the center will control directly. For the rest, they will work through the government of Jammu and Kashmir. That was the kind of autonomy that was promised. That is the kind of situation that right now exists, say, with Catalonia, between Catalonia and the Spanish central authority, and the tensions remain. That's why Barcelona calls itself Més que un club, which means not just a club. That means more than a club, or not just a club. What that means is that Barcelona represents an idea which is not just a football club. It also represents an idea of Catalonian autonomy. I'm telling you this long story because I'm coming to the central interesting point here, or the central argument here, which is that sport divides, but sport also unites. In this case, if you see the Spanish team that beat the French, of the 11 that came out to play first, of the 11 that started, of the 11 starters, 4 were Catalonian, and these 4 included key people who were also key to Spain's success yesterday. Marc Cucurella, for example. Remember him in defense, particularly in the last 10-15 minutes when the French were launching those desperate attacks. You saw how grateful this Spanish goalkeeper Simon seemed to be to Cucurella, because he bailed him out so many times when the French had broken through very formidable Spanish defense. Or the winger in attack, or the right winger in attack, what football would now call right inverted forward, that was Lamine Yamal, whose 19th birthday incidentally was 2 days back. On the day he turned out to play, he was 19 years and 1 day old. Now the important thing is this Spanish team has looked so united. And when the Spanish go out to play football or any team game, see the Spanish in India. Where do we play the Spanish? We play them in hockey, in field hockey, and they are a formidable team. They've been champions of the world. It takes some doing to beat them. When they play anybody in field hockey also, players come from everywhere, but they are very united. So you can say that sport unites. I saw a newsletter in Politico, of which I will share a screenshot with you, which said how football is actually helping Spain address one of its central problem. So sport unites, but sport also divides. That's a bit of an aside, but I will tell you. Now, say Real Madrid, Barcelona, rivals. Many other clubs are rivals, and many of the players who play in the national team or any national team actually are bitter rivals because they play for rival clubs. So I will take you back to a discussion that I once saw on BBC many years ago, and that theme of the discussion was why men kill men. And Ian Botham was one of the participants, and he said, I don't quite mind men killing men as long as they do it for the right reasons. So the anchor said, what can be the right reasons for men to kill men? He said, like which football club we support. So sport unites, sport also divides, but sort of in a nice way, in a competitive way. Now, once again, I told you Spain is so fascinating and so complex and so interesting that we'll go back and forth a little bit. So I told you about the Catalonian issue and what's ongoing now, and this looks like this will remain an ongoing problem in Spain almost perpetually. At the same time, the country will get more and more united, and the country will also become more powerful because its economy sometimes it falls into a rut, but otherwise it recovers quickly because Spain has many strengths, very talented people, very talented immigrants also, as you can also see Lamine Yamal, for example. You can also see in its football team. One of the low points for Spain came about 16, 17 years ago in the wake of the global financial crisis. So Spain then became the S in the group called PIGS, that is Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain, the countries whose economies had gone into a collapse. At some point, Ireland was also added to it, so it became a double I, but that's not quite relevant. So Spain came out of that. Spain has a lot of natural products to sell, from olives and olive oil to wine. At the same time, Spain also is a manufacturing power. See, for example, the C-295 multi-purpose transport aircraft, which Tatas are now building in India in partnership with a company which is essentially at this point Spanish. Spain had a rough beginning in the 20th century. It stayed out of the First World War. It stayed out of the Second also. That we'll come to. However, a socialist elected government took over power in Spain in the 1930s. That was the era of Hitler and Mussolini. That was also the era of the rise of nationalism in Europe. And that's when General Francis Franco rose in Spain at the head of a nationalist force. Nationalist, some people call it fascist, other people don't call it fascist, but a hard nationalist or near fascist force that started a civil war. In that civil war, ultimately, the elected government or the Republicans, they lost. That's a war that was very popular with socialists all over the world. Many went to Spain to fight it on the side of the Republicans. Unfortunately, the losing side. These included George Orwell, the great writer, Ernest Hemingway. He went to the Spanish Civil War to cover it, but his sympathies were with the Republicans. That's where his most famous work, For Whom the Bell Tolls, is also located. Franco, however, won the war and ruled Spain, and he became probably the longest ruling dictator of the 20th century. Started in 1939, only went out in 1975 with his death. Funny guy. He was a general, a dictator, but as his heir apparent, he had nominated the King of Spain, Juan Carlos I, who then took over and very quickly brought in democracy. By 1978, a democratic constitution had been adopted. In 1981, there was a coup attempt by an army officer, obviously because the old nationalist tendencies were still alive. That was defeated. Since then, Spain has been a democracy. Interestingly, Spain only became a member of NATO in 1982. Then we know what happened after the end of the Soviet Empire. Then many other members joined NATO. Even after that, it took Spain 4 more years to join EU, and then it was still a reluctant member of NATO. It joined the integrated military command structure of NATO only in 1996. Within Spanish politics, it's always been an issue how subservient can Spain be to sort of the American power. Yet in the Afghan war, Spain sent soldiers and police people, of whom 102 died over 20 years. This was a big matter of controversy and debate in Spanish parliament, but they stayed steadfast. That's why now with the Iran war, Spain on day one of the war dissociated itself. It said this was an unjust war. It was a war forced on Iran and they will have nothing to do with it. At the same time, Pedro Sanchez, the Prime Minister of Spain, also called Iranian regime a hateful regime. So Spain is balancing this. Spain also said they will not let the Americans use their bases for any operations. That led to quite a spat with Donald Trump, as you would expect. Donald Trump threatened to stop all trade with Spain. That hasn't happened. But that spat then also spilled over into a fight between Pedro Sanchez and Elon Musk also. So Pedro Sanchez decided to limit the use of social media to those above the age of 16 and not allow children to use it. He also said that this has become a republic of its own. He also said social media has become a failed state, lawless and full of disinformation, not the truth. Elon Musk, as you would expect, he said Sanchez is a tyrant, he's an enemy of the Spanish people, and also added a poop emoji for effect. So the man has taken on both Donald Trump and Elon Musk. At the same time, he has taken on Israel. He held a conference of socialist leaders in April in Spain, where Lula of Brazil also attended. And he then sought support for ICJ, International Court of Justice, to push action against the Israelis and also to build pressure on EU to stop its economic ties with Israel. Also, while Spain did condemn Russian invasion of Ukraine, when Trump gave the call to European countries to raise their defense spending to 5% of the GDP, most countries said, yes, we'll do it. They gave themselves a time frame, not today, but in the course of time. Spain said they will have nothing to do with it. So they've been fighting with Trump on day one on all issues most important to him. And now they're on the verge of trying to get the greatest honor in the history of football in his country. And Spain is actually an incredible sporting power for a country with a population under 5 crores. Look at their success in football. This is their third time they entered the semi-final at FIFA. The second time in the final. Last time they were in the final in 2010. They won. They became the world champions. Remember Nadal, 22 Grand Slams, and now they've got Alcaraz. And also in track and field hockey, I told you, Spain is a genuine global sporting power, not very different from Australia. And since there is a possibility, I'm not predicting anything, I'm not in the betting business, since there is a possibility that Spain may end up playing Argentina in the final, even if they don't, it's a story worth telling. That when Lamine Yamal was a baby as in a baby, his parents won a raffle in Barcelona. And the prize was you could go and meet one Barcelona player, and they got to meet Messi. So they took their baby to meet Messi. And now it's often said that it's almost like Messi had found the baby to pass his football mantle to.